Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching the Lab 1 video for Wins in Windows Server 2003. In this first video, we're going to take a look at the Wins, Windows Internet Naming Service, and we're going to go over the installation of Wins on a single computer first, our Server 1 system we spoke of in the lab setup. From there, we're going to focus on the Win server properties, client configuration, active registrations, what these are, how we can manipulate these and actually query through them. Then we're going to go through some NBTSTAT commands just to see what we can do from the Wins client or the Wins server. Now let's take a look at the overall diagram that we're dealing with here. And just as a refresher of what we're going to be doing in this course, we're sitting right now on this XP1 machine as we talked about in the lab setup video. From here, what we're going to do is form a remote desktop connection over to Server 1. And this is where we're going to install Wins and then start managing this machine as a Wins server. Okay, let's get started with this. And like I said, we're going to use remote desktop and we'll just connect right over to Server 1. Okay, so we're sitting on Server 1 here, and to install Wins, it's pretty straightforward and it's very similar to how we installed DNS and also DHCP if you've watched those videos as well. But that's not where you do it. We've got to go through the Control Panel, then add or remove programs. And then from here, you're going into add remove Windows components. Now this takes a little bit of time, but after this opens up, what we're going to be looking for are the networking services, and within networking services, one of the subcomponents of networking services is the Wins service, and that's what we're going to be selecting. You will need the CD for this. It's going to install some information off of the CD, and then after that's installed, what we'll do, we'll stay right here on this machine and we'll start worrying about the Wins server properties. Okay, so this should load up here any second, and then we can go ahead and install the Wins service. Okay, you see it opening up right now. And finally we've got it. Oops, do I select something up here? No, okay. You want to make sure you don't select something on accident. It's not something we want to do for any reason. Okay, now you see this machine already has DNS, and as a matter of fact, Server 1, as we talked about in the lab setup video, is a domain controller that's running DNS already. And Wins is really, it's okay to install this on the same machine that's your domain controller as well as DNS server. It's not going to hurt anything. The only time you want to think about splitting up Wins is if you're in a larger environment. Okay, you may want to think twice about installing Wins on a domain controller if you have a lot of logins coming in every morning. Okay, the two services are really busy almost at the exact same time. Okay, so what we're going to do here is click OK, click Next, and then let this installation process take off. So while this is going on, I'm going to stop this video here momentarily and we'll start it right back up again once the Wins service is installed. Okay, Server 1 is now finished up. Wins is installed on it. So what we'll do is just go to Start, All Programs, Administrative Tools, and then open up our Wins server that we see here. Okay, now this will just open up a Wins console, and from here, just like we could with DNS or DHCP, we can manage different servers if we have multiple Wins servers on our network, just by right-clicking here and then clicking Add Server. Some other things we can do here, if I right-click and go to Properties, okay, we can display servers in the console, so if we had a bunch of servers, we could better organize them based upon name or IP address. Server Status, if I right-click this, I can go to Properties here as well. And this just gives us a chance to, or the ability to update statistics every 5 minutes as the default. And of course, we can change this if we want to see statistics more frequently here. Okay, and what this gives us is what you see over here. If you have several different servers, it's going to list all of these here, tell us whether or not it's up and running, what the IP address is, and then its response. Is it responding? Okay, is it not responding? So on and so forth. As you can see here, Server 1 at 192.168.1.100 is our Wins server, and not a lot going on underneath here, so we'll take a look one step at a time. Let's first select Server 1, right-click, and then let's go down through some of these different pieces that we can do here. Okay, the number one thing we can do is display server statistics. If you want to find out more about the server, here's where we can go and we can test and see whether or not the registrations are successful, when the Wins server actually started up, total queries to the Wins server, releases, registrations, all sorts of different stuff. When we're first looking at this right now, it's not going to make as much sense as it's going to, after you've worked with Wins a little bit more. Okay, right-clicking up here again. Next, we can go down to scavenge database. Okay, and if we do this, it says the request scavenge database has been queued on the server. Check the Windows event log for status and when this operation is completed. To scavenge the database is basically to go through it and clean up all the old garbage. Okay, in a little bit here, we're going to talk about deleting Wins records, tombstoning Wins records, so you get a better feel for what we're speaking of. But to make it simple for right now, we have the ability to delete old Wins records, but they're not instantly deleted from the database. It's when we scavenge that these records are picked up and basically thrown in the trash. Okay, right-clicking up here again. We can verify database consistency or version ID consistency by selecting either one of these. Okay, and it tells us right here that Wins consistency checking is very processing and network intensive. What's going on here, if we have several Wins servers, these machines are going to be going across the network and talking to each other, verifying their Wins active registration databases. So if they're filled with thousands of entries, it can take a lot of time to pass this information back and forth, and also just compute to make sure that everything matches up. Now, we can schedule this to happen nightly or however often we want it to happen without having to come here and force the process. Okay, so this isn't necessary to come here and just click verify database consistency or version ID consistency either. Next, we can start, push, or pull replication, and we're not going to be working with replication until the next lab, so we'll come back to these then. Back up the database. If you want to back up the database right now, we can of course just click this, and it's a nice easy interface. If I want to make a backup to the C drive, I can click OK here, and now it's making a backup of the Wins database to the C drive. Okay, the database backed up was successful. If I go and look at the C drive, oops, we're actually going to the wrong place here. I got to minimize over here on server 1. Okay, here we see a Wins_back folder. Okay, and then within here we see that we actually backed up the Wins database. This is the actual Wins database right here, wins.mdb. Okay, and you can see that this took place this date, November 15th at 3:34, so it matches up our information down below. So you can just see that this just happened right now. Okay, so that easy to back up the Wins database. Next, if we right-click up here again, all tasks, we can stop, start, pause, restart the Wins service. This is helpful sometimes if you need to, maybe you've changed some things around, you want to restart it and just get it back up and running. Sometimes restarting the database of not just Wins, but any of these services will help out. Down below, we can go to Properties. And when we go to Properties, we have several more tabs to worry about. How often we want to automatically update statistics. Here, database backup. Now, we can automate this process. If we want to automate the process of backing up, we can choose where we want to back up all the time. Okay, and a network location would be nice, where we can actually get it off of this Wins server itself. And then we can back up the database during server shutdown. So anytime it's going to shut down, we'll actually back up this Wins database ahead of that shutdown. Intervals. This controls, the basic ones that we're worried about are the renew interval and the verification interval. Well, the renew interval, if we look here, tells us right here how often a client renews registrations of its name. Okay, and then you can change this, but by default, Wins clients begin attempting to refresh their name registrations after 1/2 the renewal interval has elapsed. So it's set at 6 days by default. So what's that stating is that after 3 days, the Wins client's going to go out and try to renew, just pretty much double check and verify that it still has the same name and IP address. The verification interval, okay, basically allows us to enter in the time once again, and this is the interval after which the Wins server must verify that names that are replicated from one server are still active in Wins. Okay, so if we had 2 Wins servers, let's say we have server 1 and server 2, okay, and server 2 has a record for some, let's say XP10, some Windows XP professional system on your network. That's going to get replicated over to server 1. Server 1 is going to leave that registration for XP10 in its database for up to 24 days before it's going to drop it from its database. Okay, so basically what we want to do here is verify that that record still exists within the original database, and that's what this particular interval is for. Database verification. Okay, here once again, before we showed you a way of just doing this manually. If you'd like to set this up so every night you have your database verified, you can do this by selecting this box and then choosing how often you want database verification to take place. So if you want it to happen every 24 hours, this is when we would do it. Now this setting here, begin verifying at, this is going to specify at exactly what time verification is going to begin. And we don't want to do this in the middle of the day where it's going to really slow down the network and also this computer. We'll do it maybe at midnight, 11 o'clock. Okay, so if we did it at, let's say 11 o'clock, that's roughly, according to this clock down here, it's about 7 hours and 22 minutes away. So I can set this to say in 7 hours and 22 minutes, I want you to start running this database verification. Okay, so that's how we set it up. Once we click OK, it'll do this then every 24 hours now. Okay, so this really is when to begin the process, and this is then after we begin the process, how often do we want to continue doing it? Okay, maximum number of records verified each period. This is 30,000 wins records, quite a few records. Depending upon what type of machine is registering, you can have anywhere from 1 to 5, 6 different records for each different computer. Then do you want to verify against only the owner of the server record? Okay, so if XP10 registered on server 2, do you only want to verify with that machine? Or do you want to just verify with any other WINS database that may be out there? Okay, and that's what randomly selected partners means. Against the owner, it can slow down the process because one machine may have more registrations than another. So that one machine can be really bogged down while the other machines on the network are just free to do whatever. And then our last tab, the Advanced tab. Here we can log detailed events in the Windows Event Log. We can also enable a feature called Burst Handling. And you can see that this says set the number of requests that a server can handle at one time before clients have to retry registration or renewal. Okay, and if you look at these numbers, basically, low is at 300, medium's at 500, and high is at 1,000. And what this is referring to is how many records can we take at any one given time before we just basically throw our hands up and say, hey, I'm just too busy to help you out right now. I'm going to have to go into burst handling mode. And what happens in burst handling mode, the machine kind of does half its job right away. It's going to check your ID, it's going to give you a record, but it's not going to go back until later on, okay, after it's slowed down some, to really check out your name and make sure that nobody else has your name and to verify, everything about it. Okay, so it's kind of in crunch time, it cuts down on the number of processes it's going to go through in order to better service the client machines connecting to it. Okay, here we see a location of the actual WINS database path. And that pretty much is makes up the majority of everything that's covered on this WINS server. Below that, we see active registrations, and we see replication partners. Now, we don't have any replication partners right now because we haven't set up a second WINS server. We'll be doing that in Lab 2. But active registrations, this is an important folder to understand. And it tells us right here we can use this space to list the computer and group records that are in the WINS database. To list the records, click Action, click Display, and in the Display Records dialog box, you can filter the records in a variety of ways. You can use NetBIOS name or IP address, or you can do it by owner or by record type. So let's try this out. Okay, you can either right-click and go to Display Records, or you can come up top and go to Action and Display Records. When you do this, here's what they're referring to. If you want to filter based upon the record name, here's where we go. If you want to do it based upon the owner server name, and you can see right here we only have one server right now, here's where you're going to go. Or if you want to do it based upon record type, we can come in here and we can filter out based upon what type of record we're looking for, and we're going to go through these here in a second. Okay, record mapping. Let's assume that we just want to see all the WINS database records. Okay, filter records matching this name pattern. Well, if you were looking for server 3, you could just type that in. But normally you're wanting to look at all the records in here. So I may just put an asterisk, which is a wildcard character, click Find Now, and we see that it finds all these different WINS records in here. Now right now we have this old system sitting here on our network and it's registered with this WINS server. These records really aren't for any machine that we've seen so far. So we're going to take a look at that machine once it's joined here. But these records will help out. It'll kind of give us a feel for the different records that we see. Okay, and let's go through these a little bit. Let's focus in on the XP1 old machine. And this is literally the NetBIOS name of this machine. We had a computer here that was formerly XP1. It's been renamed to XP1 old just to indicate that it's the no longer the preferred machine. Okay, so XP1 is the NetBIOS name. If we look over here to the right, we see type, IP address, and then state. Okay, well, type, we have 3 different records for XP1 old. We have workstation, messenger, and file server. The IP addresses in all cases are exactly the same, so that's a good thing. Why 3 records though? What is this? What we're dealing with here is a different registration record for different purposes. This workstation, this has to do with whether or not you have the client for Microsoft Networks installed in your system. And any machine that's part of a Microsoft network is going to have this. So this record's very, very common. You're going to see a workstation record, which is identified by the 00 number here. This H, by the way, stands for hexadecimal. So this is a hexadecimal number. That's just exactly what this means. It means this number is 00 in hexadecimal, or this number is 20 in hexadecimal, or 1E in hexadecimal. Okay, so that's all that H means in this case. Okay, so here, 00, this is the actual number that indicates that this is a workstation record. And this record is going to be common on all Windows clients. This is the client piece of software that we need in order to connect to Windows servers. Okay, so you'll see this for all the different records that we create today. Another very common record is the 03 record, Messenger. Okay, and this is for the Messenger service. And what this is going to do, this allows programs like NetSend, and also there's some console messages that we can send back and forth between computers. It allows these messages to work by using these NetBIOS names. So I can literally do a NetSend message out to XP1 old, send a message out, and this messenger service is going to be what's accountable for making it all work. And then a third record that we see here is the 20 record. Okay, and you see here that it says file server. You can call it file server or the server service, but this record is enabled anytime you have a machine that is set up to allow file and printer sharing. Okay, and most machines are by default. Oops. For example, we're going to go here to the network settings. If we take a look at the properties of this network card, you see here that client from Microsoft Networks is installed and checked over here. And we also have file and printer sharing for Microsoft Networks installed and checked. Because both of these are checked, that's what's actually enabling these different NetBIOS records that we saw over here in the Wins database. Okay, so we have an XP1 old, that's the name, and then here's the registration record according to the specific service. So if you wanted to talk to the server surface on XP1 old, that's what would be happening here. You would literally be coming over to the 192.168.1.3 IP address and then asking to speak to this particular service if you're indeed trying to, let's say, access a file or a printer. Okay, so this is an example of different records. Now up top here, we see a couple more administrator than 1, 2, 3. This administrator record, this is referring to the actual name that was used to log on to the system. And you can see that this is a username. You could have different usernames, but it's also a messenger record as well. So names can also be used within these messenger records. So if I wanted to net send somebody named administrator, I could send them a message as well since their name is indicated here. We have a couple more records. We have 00 workgroup, and then we have the 1E, and this says normal group name. Okay. And this one here, we'll focus on this one. 00 is referring to the actual name. Okay, it says that this particular computer is part of a domain or work group, and that's what this is here. 1, 2, 3, we just renamed the computer's work group to 1, 2, 3 here quickly, just to take it out of the domain. Okay, remember, XP1 was part of our working network here not too long ago. We wanted to remove it from the domain, so instead of coming up with a better workgroup name or domain name, just typed in there 1, 2, 3 to take it out of that WBC domain, and that's where we came up with these names from. Okay, let's go back now to our client machine and see how we configure the Wins client and see how that changes everything we were just looking at. So now we're sitting on XP1, our XP Professional machine, and we're going to go into the network card settings. So I right click, go to properties, want to make sure I choose the right network card, so it's the connected one. Go to properties here. Okay, and by default we don't see any WINS settings here. We have to go to advanced and then click the WINS tab up top. Okay, WINS addresses in order of use. There's none listed here, but if I click add, now I can add the IP address of the WINS server. Okay, 192.168.1.100. Click add. We won't worry about these other settings right now. Click OK, click OK, click OK a third time. Okay, and there's really, kind of not eventful. It doesn't say anything or do anything. If I go over here now back to server 1, let's see what happens. I just refreshed here. Okay, and it took a second, but after a couple seconds here, we see that now all of a sudden we're populated with new registration records. Okay, we see I'm going to do it one more time to see if anything else pops up. Okay, same ones. So we have 3 registration records here that were not present before. Okay, XP1, this computer name has now registered the 20 service, the server service at 192.168.1.1. So if you wanted to communicate with a printer on XP1, or you wanted to access a file or a folder on XP1, you'd connect using this IP address and then this service type that's mentioned here. The workstation service, remember what that is. Okay, remember that's the Microsoft client, because XP1 has, I'm going to go back here again. Oops, didn't mean to close that. Because XP1 has the client from Microsoft Networks checked and installed here, and also has file and printer sharing from Microsoft Networks installed. Both of these here, that's what's responsible for what we see over here. Okay, we see that we have the workstation service, and we also have the file server or the server service enabled. And the third piece associated with XP1 is this right here, and that's the WBC. And this is the domain that it's part of. This is the NetBIOS domain name. We have a 00 record, work group record for 192.168.1.1. So this is kind of linking up this 192.168.1.1 IP address machine, which is XP1, to the work group name of WBC. Okay, and even though it says work group here, this is going to be synonymous for work group or domain. It could be either one in this case. It's just whatever security group we're referring to. Okay. The last thing we're going to take a look at is the NBTSTAT command. Okay, the NBTSTAT command. And we can use this command, and we're back here on XP1 by the way, and we're going to just run this command from here. And the NBTSTAT command is used as the description up top here says. Move up here. Okay, displays protocol statistics and current TCP/IP connections using NBT, which is NetBIOS over TCP/IP. So this is just the NetBIOS over TCP/IP statistics command. And you can see here when I run it all by itself, it's not doing anything except for displaying exactly what this command is for and the different switches or options that can be used along with it. And it looks a little bit confusing at first, but honestly, the switches are fairly straightforward and pretty simple to use. We're going to run through several of them here. First one we'll start off with, we're going to take a look at this names here, list local NetBIOS names. And we'll take a look at some other ones as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. The format or the syntax of this command is just NBTSTAT. Put a space in there, and then whatever switch you want to run, you just put dash in that particular switch. And do pay attention to the case sensitivity here. Whatever it is, you need to put that exact same letter type. So I'm going to be putting in dash. We're going to do N first here. Okay, and if you look here, it says list local NetBIOS names. When I run this command, take a look at what it gives me. Okay, it says XP1 00. XP1 20 and WBC00. These are the type of registration records. Okay, and it tells us right here that we are registered. What this is referring to is that actual WINS server that we registered with previously. So if I were to connect over here, I'm going to connect back over to server 1, our WINS server. Okay, here are those records once again. Okay, XP1, you see we have the 20, which is the server service, 00 is the workstation service, And because we have the name of the workgroup or domain, this is the workgroup service in this case, or the workgroup record type. Okay, so coming back over here again, take a look just to verify these names and numbers match up to what's registered with the WINS database. Okay, so if this is a little bit confusing to you, well, these are issued automatically because NetBIOS is enabled on this computer. These record types will be here. Now, when we go out and actually register with the WINS server, these are then the WINS registration record types that we're going to register with that WINS server, and that's why we end up getting these. Okay, let's clear our screen here, and now we're just going to run. And by the way, if you're not familiar with DOS, I just ran a CLS for clear screen, and that's what it just erased everything. It didn't really do anything except cleared up the look of the screen. Okay, we're going to run NBTSTAT once again, just to show us everything that we saw before. And now what we'll do is check out a couple other things. We're going to take a look at let's take a look at another machine's names. For example, we just list the local NetBIOS names. Let's take a look at what the remote machine's name table given its name looks like. Okay, and let's talk about both these commands together. These up to this point right here, okay, are the exact same thing. List the remote machine's name table given its name or IP address. Okay, so you can see if we do a small a, you're putting in a name. If you're doing a big A, you're putting in an IP address. So to show you then, NBTSTAT -a space the name. Okay, server 1. When I hit enter here, now look at all the different records this machine has. Now this is just like we ran before when we ran that NBTSTAT -n command. If we ran NBTSTAT -n on server 1, it would give us this information right here. Okay, so this is all the information that that system needs to register. And just going through some of these, server 100, this is the name. Okay, so this is just registering the workstation service. Server 120, here's the server service or file server service. You'll see it sometimes called. I don't see a messenger service in this one, but some other ones we do see. This one here is actually saying that this machine is a PDC or a PDC emulator. That's important in domain environments like we have, master browser, some other stuff we're not going to get into. I don't want to confuse matters here, but each one of these records are registered separately, and they're used by this machine to identify and determine exactly what types of services it has available to other machines. Just look at this briefly. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different records. You can kind of get a feel for what they look like. Let's see what happens if we run the alternative to this command with the big A and the IP address. Okay, so I got my NBTSTAT big A. Okay, and then the IP address of server 1. When I run this, notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 records. The records, if you look at them, are identical. They're exactly the same. They're presented in the exact same order. Okay, so it just goes to show you what this command and how this command is used. It's the exact same command. It depends upon if you want to use a name or an IP address. Okay, so we're going to just run the NBTSTAT command again so we can take a look at our help screens. So we've run A, big A, and little n. Let's take a look at the C switch for cache. And this command lists the NetBIOS over TCP/IP cache of the remote names and their addresses. Okay, so interesting. Let's take a look at this and we'll talk about the usefulness of it. NBTSTAT space -c. Okay, and if you look here, you see that we have several entries. Okay, they all have server 1 listed within them with the number. Host address is the same. That's server 1's IP address. And then over here we have a number, and this is actually the life of this record, how much longer it's actually valid for in seconds. Okay, 477, 465, and 180. Just to give you a quick hint on this, if I were to run this exact same command again, watch what happens to the seconds. I've been talking for what, 30, 40 seconds or so. Look what happens if I run this exact same command again. See, the time has just decreased down here. So once this 147 seconds has elapsed, this record is no longer going to be part of this local name cache. And that's something we should go further into because I don't think we talked about that yet. What is this cache? What's it for? Well, when we go out and we talk to a Win server, of course, it's going to consume network resources. We're going across the network. It may be a local area network or it may be a wide area network. That's not important. We're consuming network resources. So what we're going to do, when we actually get the IP address for server 1, like we see here, okay, and we get the server service and then the workstation service, like we see here, we're going to take this information, this IP address, and then attach it to this record, and we're going to save that information here locally. Why? Well, we're going to put it here locally, save it in our name cache, because the next time we want to talk to server 1, we're going to check this local name cache first before we go out, okay, and talk to that Win server, before we go out and start broadcasting for this information again. So what ends up happening is your name resolution times are significantly increased, and you're not wasting network bandwidth either, okay, and that's an important concept to realize. Okay, so that's what this cache is all about here. When you're trying to do a NetBIOS name resolution, very first thing that happens is we check our cache first before any broadcasting or anything else is done. Okay, now, okay, we see that this has gone down here, another roughly 100 seconds or so for each one. What if I want to get rid of this cache? Maybe I change the IP address of server 1, and this entry is causing some weird things to happen. For example, let's say you change the IP address of server 1 to .57. If you ping server 1, your local name cache is going to still tell you it's at 100, and you're going to end up trying to ping 100, and it's going to time out. Okay, so what I can do if I wanted to is purge this cache, and to do that, we're using a different NBTSTAT command. If we look up here, we're using the -R or reload. This purges and reloads the remote cache name table. Okay, successful purge and preload. Run this again, NBTSTAT C. No names in the cache. Okay, no names in the cache. Interesting. Okay, well, how do I get names back in the cache again? You can start connecting over to resources is what you can do. And we've got DNS enabled, so DNS can kind of play tricks with you a little bit, but one thing in particular, when we use these UNC names like this, //server1, this actually is using NetBIOS and not DNS WinSock like we discussed previously. So if I click this, click OK, what's actually happening is I'm using either a Win server or broadcasting in order to connect over here to server 1. And I don't even need to log on to server 1. This was enough right here. I found that information. That information should show up in my cache right now. If I take a look, see server 1 now showed up with a complete new life, 600 seconds. Okay, it's ticked down 10 since we ran this command though. Okay, what if I want to connect to server 2? Same thing. Okay, and I'm not going to connect over right now just because I'm trying to demonstrate something to you. So I close that, run this again, and now you see you have entries for both server 1 and server 2. Okay, maybe this confuses you a little bit. Let's go do a quick review of why this happened here. Well, remember what this is. This is a NetBIOS cache. We've got a cache here to more quickly resolve names to IP addresses. We just had to resolve a name to an IP address because when we did this, start, run, //server 2, remember server 2, this is a name that humans use to make it easier to connect to other machines. So this machine probably broadcast over the network or used a Win server and basically said, hey, I'm looking for server 2. Anybody server 2 out there? Server 2 responded with its IP address. Our machine, the local XP machine that we're on, figured it'd be a smart thing to do to note this name and note this IP address. So the next time we need to go back out there again, we don't need to broadcast. Okay, we have this name here locally, at least for, now 535 more seconds. Okay, once this goes away, then we'll have to go through that same process again. Okay, so that's what the cache is all about. If you look at your machine after you've been using it for a while on the network, you'll notice it's filled with a lot of entries, but once you first boot up, there's nothing in there at all. Okay, what other commands? NBTSTAT. Got through A, we got through C, got through N. Okay, reload we did. That pretty much does a pretty good job of looking at all of these. The important ones anyway. The other ones I don't think are used nearly as much. Yeah, no, the other ones aren't used nearly as much. So it's a good time to stop this lesson. What we'll do is we'll stop right here, and we're going to pick up on this information in Lab 2. Okay, in Lab 2, what we're going to do is we're going to install a second Win server. we're going to look at the interaction between the two Win servers and learn a little bit more about replication and how that process takes place between two different Win servers in order to avoid database corruption. Okay, we'll see you back here real soon for Lab 2.